Hey, it's Dr. Sherry. So one of the things that I think is a challenge for so many of us, especially those of us who are high performers, who have a lot of goals and a lot of vision and a lot of passion and energy for life, we get caught up in this pesky little word and situation called failure, right? Because the reality is we all fail. None of us are perfect. None of us live our life and interact in relationships perfectly. None of us achieve goals perfectly. So in this journey of life, there will always be failure. What I have come to discover is that when a failure happens, I have an opportunity to take one of two paths. I have the opportunity to either interpret that failure in a way that allows me to continue to move forward, or I can take that failure and shrink back and let it keep me from moving forward or moving on. So 100%, I don't want to experience a failure as a deflation of my energy, as a deflation of my value in this world, of my worth, of my abilities. I want to reinterpret failure in a way that allows me to continue to move forward. And so I just kind of want to share with you just some ways to think about failure that will allow you to not shrink back. Okay? So think about it this way. And these are pretty nuanced. They all kind of blend together a little bit, but I'm just going to share them in a few different ways. Just hopefully some of them land on you in a way that you can grasp, that your brain thinks, oh yes, I can totally reinterpret things that way. So the first way that you can kind of reinterpret a failure is simply that it's a learning process. It's a process. Life is a process. Whatever failure you experienced is part of the process of the journey of life. And so what can you learn from it? It's not just a failure. I hear a lot the idea that a failure isn't a failure if you can learn something from it. And I kind of agree with that. And so think about Thomas Edison or any of the amazing inventors. Wood Edison, he had thousands upon thousands of quote unquote failures when he was trying to just invent the light bulb. But he didn't see his first failure, he didn't interpret it as I just failed in this experiment. Therefore, I'm just going to shrink back, shrivel up, stop experimenting, and do something else. Clearly, I wasn't meant to create the light bulb. Clearly, the light bulb is not even possible. It's not even a thing. He didn't do that. He kept on moving forward because he had the perspective that it was an experiment and it's a learning process. So if you came at life with an attitude of experimentation, that it's just a series of learning events, how would that change what you try to do and the ideas that you bring to this world and you execute or try to execute? Would that change things for you? So asking yourself, what can I learn from this, can be critical. Another way to think about failure is that it might just be a redirection towards something better. Literally, my husband and I had a conversation about this morning. The language that my husband uses around this redirection, because I noticed that he actually uses this particular form of reinterpreting failure a lot. And what he says is, dodge that bullet. Have you ever said something like that before, where something maybe doesn't happen that you really wanted to happen? You tried it and it just didn't happen. But then you look back at it a little bit later and you're like, whoa, I'm actually glad that didn't happen. I'm glad I didn't succeed in that because if I had known then what I do now, I wouldn't have wanted that success. So having the perspective, even if you don't have all of the facts that tell you that you dodged a bullet, you could still have that mindset. You could still have that interpretation that maybe, just maybe, this was God's way of redirecting your life in a way that if he hadn't, you would have stepped in a pile of you know what that would have been disastrous for your life and disastrous for what why you've been put on this earth. So redirection towards something better. This is also a strategy that I had to use a few years ago in my own life when I was transitioning between businesses and kind of rediscovering how I wanted to serve people, how I wanted to offer counseling and offer psychological services as a psychologist. It's like I was just kind of reimagining what that could look like. And in some respects, I felt like a failure, kind of closing down and selling my last business. And so I really struggled with just how that impacted my self-esteem and my vision going forward. But when I, through a series of, seeking my own counsel, I was able to start to shift my mindset around, actually, if I reinterpret that not as a failure, but as a pivot, that's just the word I kind of landed on that made sense for me. I'm pivoting my professional identity and how I serve people. Pivoting felt very genuine to my experience, but it also was the language. It allowed me to reinterpret what I felt emotionally was a failure, but turn it into something else that was actually allowed me to kind of to grow and expand the way that I serve people. Just unlocked a whole lot of freedom, emotional freedom, among other things. And so that idea of redirecting, that this failure has been an opportunity to kind of redirect you into something different, can be huge in your emotional life. Also, another way to think about it is that it's just a step in what you experience. The failure that you experience is actually just a stepping stone to the next thing. Because if you hadn't tried that one thing, you wouldn't have the knowledge, you wouldn't have any additional skills, you wouldn't have the emotional fortitude, you wouldn't have had built an additional relationship that maybe you did through that failure that now you're using on your next step. I've also experienced that multiple times where I did something, launched something. I launched a mastermind. It's probably about 1.5 years ago by now. I think maybe it was beginning of 2020. I launched a mastermind, and it wasn't as robust and big as I expected and hoped it to be. And so sometimes I would feel like a failure afterwards when I'm like, I only had a few people show up, and and I could let myself get into this negative talk and spiral downwards, and get down on myself. But if I let myself do that, and I stayed there, and I stayed with the interpretation that what I just tried was a failure, that would have been detrimental for a couple reasons. One is because I wasn't recognizing and honoring the people that I was serving. So my perspective of success was, having a lot of people attend, when rather my definition of success would have been better suited in focusing on the quality of how I served the people that did show up. And honestly, it was amazing. The relationships that I built with some of those folks that came, that showed up, and the value that they got out of it. They didn't care that there wasn't 25 people present. They loved the fact that I was just being faithful to doing it, even at the same time that I had this narrative running in the back of my mind of like, oh, Dr. Sherry, I feel like this is a failure. It should have been bigger. It should have been this, should have been that. But it was a stepping stone. It was a stepping stone to doing more groups and to launching more masterminds. It was a learning opportunity because as I would do more and as I am growing in the way that I serve people, I know things, I know how to do things and deliver things and add more value in a way that I wouldn't have had I not taken that first step or not had that step. Also, sometimes that stepping stone is building relationships and becoming aware of opportunities that you wouldn't have known otherwise. And that I've also experienced. So, I mean, I guess I could just say I've experienced all of these. But it really is an intentionality in taking an experience that kind of feels like a failure, didn't result in what you had hoped, but you're learning how to reinterpret that situation in a way that's valuable and beneficial to you and gives you energy instead of sucking the energy out. So it allows you to move forward. Maybe you're pivoting, maybe you're still just moving full bore ahead, and either way is fine. But that failure is giving you information, is giving you data points, is giving you context, is giving you experience that you can integrate into who you are, what you do, what you know, so that as you move forward, you are better. And what you're doing is more impactful, or who you are is changing for the positive because you're learning and growing. This is the whole life of having a growth mindset, of being someone who's on a journey. Like all of these things, these are ways of interpreting that every one of us needs, because none of us approaches life with that proverbial handbook of how to be the most awesome person all the time, having all the right answers, doing all the things perfectly, winning all the time. That is completely unrealistic. So it behooves us to figure out how do we interpret failure in a way that keeps us from shrinking back and allows us to continue to move forward. And oh, by the way, as I was talking about this, that just made me think, these are the lessons that we need to teach the next generation. Because in a world of participation medals and awards and everybody's a good person, they're going to be struggling with failure, will they not? So as I'm teaching you guys this, as I'm reminding myself about all of this, I've got kids in the next room that I need to be intentional about teaching them how to reevaluate failure, because they fail all the time. Because they're kids and they're learning. They're human. So don't just take these ideas and don't just think about how you can reinterpret failure for yourself, but how can you do it and share it with the next generation? Because they are going to be the ones that are supporting you when you're old. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you guys got value out of this. Think about what failure you're currently experiencing or just recently experienced, and how can you reinterpret that failure in a way that you can identify it was learning and I needed it, or it was a stepping stone in another direction and I'm grateful for it. Or you know what? It's redirecting me to do something else or to do something slightly different, a pivot. And I'm grateful and blessed to have gotten that pivot because, man, I dodged a bullet. It's Dr. Sherry, and I'll see you in the next video.